hear me, I would like for a person with the last name letter starting with a letter A to send me a text that they can hear me, or type in the chat bar. Can you hear me? If you cannot, please let me know. Oh no. Hold on, let me check to make sure everything's going all right. Let's see what. Can you hear me? Hello, how is my sound? Somebody, if you can, please let me know. Can someone hear the broadcast? Fantastic. How's everybody doing out there today? Can you hear me? Fantastic. Okay. Is my video jumpy? Is the video jumpy? Okay, fantastic. I hope you're able to see me today. It looks like my... Okay, yeah, I'll have to work out my internet issues here. Hold on, let me check for just a second. You know what? I hope this doesn't trash this broadcast. Okay. Give me just 1 second to see if I can figure something out. Okay. You know what? Well, then we'll just go without it then. I'll see if I can do my best. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everybody for showing up. I cannot believe that we've got almost 40 people in here today. I'm coming to you live from Willow Springs, North Carolina. Yeehaw. I hope some people are from around my area. It's good to see you. This is the first broadcast of this semester, and this is my teaching studio. If during the broadcast you want, you can text me if you have any questions, or you can type in the chat bar, and I see a ton of you are typing in the chat bar, so feel free to use that to communicate. I'm going to try to keep an eye on it. It's over here on this side. I'm going to try to keep an eye on it, but if I miss a question, don't hesitate to type that question in or send me a text. I will try to keep up with it. This link is also a recording as well, so after this class, you can come and click on this link, and this video will be here. It just won't be live. This is where you can find your YouTube lectures. Now, these lectures cover the textbook, and they are for test preparation. If you don't want to come to these lectures, that's fine. You can read the textbook. But this is my way of helping you get your way through the textbook and the material. So feel free to attend or not attend as you like. I'm going to try to keep them interesting and fun so that you'll want to come back. How about that? If you subscribe to my channel, from what I'm told, I'm supposed to tell you to subscribe to my channel by clicking on a bell or something. And if you do that, you'll get reminders so you won't miss any of my lectures this semester. So please subscribe to my channel. And if I get too many texts or, like I said, too many chats and I can't keep up, I apologize. I will do my best. All right. Before we get started, I want to take you to my whiteboard that's in my office and give you a little shout out. Okay. I use the whiteboard anytime I have some notes that I don't want to put into a PowerPoint presentation. So I just want to tell you that 160 of you have already done the course entry quiz, and we are less than 1 day into this class. Thank you very much. You are awesome. That's 82% of you. And you know what? Almost 90% of you have already signed up for Remind. In fact, you did such a great job signing up for Remind that you crashed it, and I had to open a second Remind class. Thank you very much. I am super duper impressed with you for doing that. And also, 26 of you have signed up to play in the Neuromatrix game. And I thought that's really, really cool. And let me see if I can go over here real quick and show you. Nope, okay. And signing up for Remind is super duper, signing up to play the game is super duper easy. So I hope that you decide to play that game with me. But I just want to say you did a great job this week. And so give yourself a round of applause. You're super duper awesome. Great job, folks. I think you were super awesome, and keep up the good work, right? So let's go ahead and get started talking. I'm going to be switching in between screens, so if it takes me a minute to get myself organized, please forgive me, okay? What I really need is a 3-person production team to do this. I will remind you about lectures every week on Remind as well, Riley. Oh yeah, that's something I meant to mention. I'm sorry if I've sent you a lot of texts in the last day, but I just wanted to sort of try to keep you in the loop and get everybody on the same page. I promise I won't be blowing up your phone from here on out. Have any of you found the number of emails annoying so far? Hopefully not. Okay, fantastic. Right, so let's go ahead and, if you will, let's go ahead and get started on today's lecture. Boom. So we're going to be talking about Chapter 1 today, which is the Hello, hello, hello. I am now back on. Oh my goodness, I am super duper sorry about that. Do you folks have me back now? Hello, hopefully you can still see me. If you can, please type in the chat bar. Can you see me now? Okay, I think we are back live. All right, folks, I apologize. I attempted to use a new Ethernet connection, and it has failed on me. Okay, I don't know why the chat has disconnected. I apologize for that. Okay, fantastic. I apologize. This is my first time out, and I've messed it up. Oh, my goodness. Hopefully you folks can forgive me. We'll see what's going on here. Am I getting choppy? Am I getting choppy? Okay. Let's see. Please let me know how my internet is going. Oh, this is terrible. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and carry on. So one of the most common reactions that I get from psychology students when they get in here is they always say, oh my goodness, I know all about psychology. This is the study of the obvious. And you know what? The reason is because you spent your entire life thinking about the way you feel, the way you think, and the way you behave, right? We never think about chemistry. Have you ever sat down and thought about covalent or ionic bonds? Absolutely not. Do you ever think about solving for X? No. But we think about ourselves all the time. In fact, thinking about ourselves is something that humans have done forever. In fact, your book, like most books, is going to introduce the Greek psychologists the Greeks as the first psychologists. And I will tell you that the Greeks were the first people to systematically think about the way we feel, behave, and think. They were the first people to really think about it. But you know what? They weren't scientists. So really, you can think of psychology as a very old pastime, but a very, very new science. Now, in order to make that point, what I'd like to do is read the definition here of psychology to you. It's the scientific study of how humans think, feel, and behave, with an emphasis on explaining how these functions are related to or being controlled by the brain. Now, what I want you to focus on is the idea of science. Science is a system of measurement. It's not an area, it's not chemistry, it's not biology. Science is a systematic way of gathering data. And in order to be a science, you have to be able to measure what it is you're looking at. But you know what? Measuring mental states is actually kind of hard. I mean, how much does your self-esteem weigh, right? The problem is you don't see these things, and so it's hard to really conceptualize them. So, in the early history of psychology, in order for psychology to really become a science, we had to demonstrate that that mental states could be measured, right? And then we had to develop a way of training people to use these measurement tools. And we needed sort of, if you will, a guidebook for how psychology should proceed. And so these early men in the 19th century were very instrumental in creating or birthing psychology as a science. And so I'm going to spend a moment talking about each of these fellows, if you don't mind. Oh, let me get over here and click on that. It'll take me just a minute to scroll over here. Okay, so the first guy is Gustav Fechner. Gustav Fechner was the first person to scientifically measure the mind. This is actually a picture of an early lab of his from the 19th century. And he discovered this thing called the just noticeable difference. It's the smallest amount that some stimulus has to change for people to be able to perceive that change 50% of the time. And so he and his colleagues were very interested in measuring people's sensory perceptions. They measured how people heard things, they measured taste, they measured vision. And so the early psychology experiments were done on the senses. And you know what? That name is actually stuck today because there's a modern profession, a subfield of psychology called experimental world, where you folks have been measuring yourself with personality tests and self-esteem tests, and et cetera, et cetera. But in the 19th century, this is a very novel idea that the mind actually behaves systematically. Now, your book is also going to talk about Wilhelm Wundt. Now, Wilhelm Wundt was very important because he was the first guy to open a psychology lab and hand out PhDs. So in his lab, psychologists would go and get training in the latest ways of measuring and engaging in systematic measurement. And so he created the first psychology laboratory. Oh my goodness, where is that image that I had? Oh, right here. In fact, in the early history of psychology, if you look at all of these graduate schools that were formed in the late 19th century, many of them had graduates from the PhD program in Leipzig, Germany, that was opened by Wilhelm Wundt. So he was the first person to open a psychology lab and credential people. And then the third fellow is named William James. And William James wrote the first psychology textbook called The Principles of Psychology in 1890. And he pretty much provided a roadmap of psychology for the 20th century. He identified the important issues, he identified the important questions, and pretty much if you will, presaged what was going to happen in the 20th century in psychology. Now, his book was super duper thick, and it was really, really heavy, and his students would complain about it. So he wrote a new abridged version that was much shorter. And from what I hear, legend has it that his students called this smaller book the Jimmy. which I think is kind of a funny thing. So these three fellows are very important in the early creation of psychology as a science. Now, what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about the practice of psychology. Now, in the early days of psychology, from 1850 to early in the 20th century, psychologists were trying to figure out the best way to approach the study of the human being. Humans are incredibly complex, right? We have things that make us feel, we think certain ways. You can study how we think, you can study how we behave, you can study the positive aspects of the human experience like hope and happiness. You can study mental illness. You can approach the study of the human being from many, many different angles. And during the early days of psychology, these unofficial schools of thought began to develop. Each of these schools was championed by a different psychologist who became eminent, and each of these schools focused on a different aspect of how the human being functioned. This chart that you see behind me is in your book. You don't have to remember the whole chart, but we're going to focus on three of the most important schools of thoughts. Now, each of these areas of each of these schools of thought has advantages, and each of them have disadvantages as well. And so don't think of these as being better or worse, but these are just different ways to focus on the human being. But three of them have probably become more important and more well-known than the other schools of thought. So we're going to focus on the three schools of thought that I have written here: psychoanalysis, behaviorism, and the cognitive schools of thought. So I'm actually sitting here in Sigmund Freud's office. Sigmund Freud was the first rock star in psychology. And just like all good rock stars, some people loved him and some people hated him. And Sigmund Freud thought that the best way to study human being was to understand how our internal drives conflicted with the rules of society. I don't know if any of you have ever felt bad and ashamed and had your behavior affected by feeling ashamed. Or I don't know if you've ever been jealous and unwilling to admit it, and that's caused you to engage in certain behaviors. If you understand how you can feel conflict in your soul and how it can affect you, you are interested in what we would call the psychoanalytic school of thought. And Sigmund Freud thought that people were driven by instinctual desires, and these desires conflicted with society's rules, and that these sort of conflicts drove people's personality. And in fact, if you've ever accused somebody of being defensive about something, you were talking about Freudian psychology. So sometimes people lie to themselves. I don't know if you have a friend that won't admit that they have a certain feeling. That person is being defensive. And so Freud and his followers studied human beings and looked at the conflicts that they had in their personalities. Now, the second approach to studying the human being, school of thought that developed early in the 20th century, was the behaviorism school of thought. So if any of you have ever trained a dog to use the bathroom outside, or to shake your hand, or how to roll over or sit, you've engaged in behavioral training practices. If any of you think that spanking is good for controlling your child's behavior, you might believe in the behaviorist perspective. Behaviorists, led by B.F. Skinner and John Watson, were interested in understanding how forces shaped our behavior. They weren't interested in studying the mind. Instead, they thought it was best to study people at the level of their behaviors and what kind of environmental forces changed their behaviors. You see behind me, this is B.F. Skinner, and you'll notice that he has all of these pigeons in cages. The behaviorists are the psychologists who are famous for studying animals and for studying rats as well, right? So if any of you have ever seen this thing right here, This is called a Skinner box, right? The rat presses the lever down here and gets a food pellet reward. And you can teach the rat how to press the bar. And so the behaviorists were interested in understanding how the environmental things like reinforcements and punishments affected our behavior. So that's the second approach. Now, in the early 1940s, this really cool thing called the computer was invented. Oh my goodness, let me see, Skinner 2, right down here. Let me show you this. Right here, this is a picture of the first computer ever created, the ENIAC, in the 1940s. Look at it. It stretches almost an entire room long, and it's probably not as powerful as your cell phone. But when this was created, people began to get interested in the thinking processes, in the information processing activities that went on inside our brains. Now, the behaviorists focused on our behavior, but the cognitive psychologists thought it was important to focus on how we thought. And could we find systematic ways in which people thought or processed information? So they were inspired by the computer, and they studied things like memory, attention, how we solve problems, how we make mistakes. And in fact, there's a new branch of psychology, a professional subfield now called cognitive neuroscience, where they try to put the brain together with thinking to figure out how neurons and brain areas process information. And this is sort of the third major school of thought. Now, these schools of thought were unofficial ways of thinking about the human being. And really, in the early 20th century, one went and got the psychology PhD. And in fact, a lot of the early psychologists, I can think of Erik Erikson as being one, I think Carl Jung was another, who didn't even have PhDs. They weren't even professors of psychology, but they were still called psychologists. Now, after World War II, psychology became a lot more professional. There were lots of PTSD cases. There was lots of TBI, traumatic brain injuries, that resulted because of World War II, and with mental health still not being well treated by psychology, there was an impetus to make psychology more professional. And so after World War II, psychology took on what we might think of as the medical model. And you know how doctors specialize. You have a podiatrist who who takes care of people's feet, an OBGYN helps women and treats women. A pediatrician specializes in children. Just like doctors specialize, it was thought that it would be better if psychologists began to specialize as well. All right? And so they created professional areas of specialization. So I'm not just a PhD in psychology. I'm actually a PhD in social psychology. That's my area of specialization. And your book in Table 1.2 is going to list all the different areas of specialization, or it's going to list a subset of the most popular, actually popular might not even be a correct word, the most common and the oldest areas of specialization. I'd like to introduce you quickly to a friend of mine, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Jeff Green, and I'm a social psychologist, just like my old friend Chris Roddenberry. And social psychologists study the social and situational influences on behavior. Topics like prejudice and stereotyping, aggression, and group dynamics. I study the self, such as how we forget unflattering things about ourselves, and self-related emotions like shame, guilt, and my favorite, nostalgia. I also study romantic relationships, especially from an attachment theory perspective, and I've even applied attachment theory to human-pet relationships. Have a great class, and social will be your favorite.
Okay, so that's my friend Jeff Green, who I went to graduate school with at UNC Chapel Hill. And so what I want you to understand for the test is I want you to be able to tell me what these areas of specialization are interested in. So a biological psychologist would be the kind of psychologist that looks at brains and neurons and chemicals in the brain. And if you take an antidepressant medicine for medication, you are working under the biological model, which suggests that psychological disorders are caused by chemical imbalances, right? If you're a developmental psychologist are interested in how people's abilities develop over their lifespan. And so they're going to study little babies, young children, teenagers, adults in an attempt to try and figure out how people evolve as they get older. Now, some of these are research areas where the focus is mainly research, like developmental psychology. Cognitive psychology is interested in thinking and information processing. And both of these areas of specialization or subfields are what we would call research-oriented. They do most of their work in research settings, trying to figure out new theories about how people think and feel. On the other hand, clinical psychologists are what we would call in an applied setting. They apply what we know in the real world to try and help people who are suffering from psychological disorders. So if you go to a doctor to get your antidepressant medicine, chances are that doctor is a clinical psychologist. You can ask them next time and find out what their area of specialization is. You know what? At NC State, they actually have an area, a subfield of psychology called industrial and organizational psychology. And these are the people who are trained to figure out how to maximize worker effectiveness in job settings. And so if you look through these areas, these disciplines, what you're going to find is that each one specializes on a different activity or area of human functioning. Now, are any of these professional areas of specialization better than others? Absolutely not. They all focus on important and independent aspects of human functioning. Now, what you see right here are the most common of the subfields of psychology. These represent some of the oldest subfields in psychology. And when you go back to that map I showed you of the United States, you're going to see that a lot of those schools are going to have these areas of specialization. But there are actually over 50 different areas of specialization that you can specialize in getting your psychology PhD. So there's sports psychology, there's forensic psychology, where psychology is applied to the courtroom, sports psychology, where it's psychological principles are applied to help athletes perform better. So there are lots of different areas of specialization that you can engage in. One of the things that we're going to do this week in our discussion board and in the webinar is I'm going to have you look through the divisions of the APA and tell me which division or area of specialization you think you might be interested in. I always find it interesting to learn what kind of psychology students are interested in. So I look forward to looking at your discussion boards this week, right? Okay, you know what? And so really, when you see these different psychologists, you're actually going to find them spread out in all different kinds of settings. So about 25% of us you'll find on college campuses being college professors and doing research. And you're going to find almost 50% of us are going to be in some sort of healthcare or helping setting. So if you look at the hospitals, the government VA medical centers, and this, independent practice up there, that makes up about 50%. Those are going to be mostly your clinical psychologists who are treating people with psychological disorders or or social difficulties. But you'll see 10% of your psychologists you will find in business settings. So I have a friend who got a PhD in cognitive psychology, and he now has a company called Plot Wolf, where he goes in and advises companies on how to create narratives that make their companies more attractive and help them generate income. So you're going to find psychologists all around you. You're going to find them in schools. You're going to find them in hospitals. You're going to find them in businesses. I don't know if any of you have any questions. I feel absolutely terrible about the live stream problem today. I will get that right for the second broadcast. But what I want you to know from today's lecture, psychology is scientific. It's scientific because we have a systematic way of measuring the mind that we're going to talk about on Thursday. Modern psychology was born in the 19th century, and three gentlemen were very important in creating the first measurement of the mind, the first psychology textbook, and the first psychology lab. And I wanted you to know about three classic approaches or ways of studying the human being. And I want you to know that today we have these things called areas of specialization or subfields where you can actually become professionally credentialed in a specific area of psychology. I don't know if you have any questions for me. Please feel free to send me a text. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties today. Hopefully, this will not happen again. And I look forward to seeing you tonight in lab, or Wednesday in lab, or Thursday in lab. If not, do the discussion board. Till I see you again next time, take care.